I'm actually editing right now. And I'm about to introduce my dad for the very first time because we got together to do a case update on the murder of Brian Thompson, an update and a brief discussion on the missing and now found Hannah Kobayashi, and then we're delving very surface level into the occurrences of New Year's Day, I guess, in Las Vegas and New Orleans. But I'm having my dad on. I just introduced him as my dad and a retired police officer. So he was in law enforcement for like 25 years. Man, I should have done this in front of him. He'd be so proud. Like 25 years, and most recently, when he retired, which was very recently, he was a crisis intervention specialist. So he worked on the mental health side of things. His partner was a social worker. He's worked in all sorts of units, I guess. He was on the SWAT team. He was on the dive team. He was a bicycle cop at one point. He was on the gang unit. He was in narcotics. He was a sergeant detective of property crimes. So he's done a lot in law enforcement. I just wanted to do a better introduction for my dad, though this one still does not do him justice. He's a great fella. So, let's just get into it. Well, hello and welcome to the S's. I'm Savannah Slater Spargo, and joining me today is my father and retired police officer Blake Slater.
Hello, happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So today we're gonna get updates on Luigi Mangione, which I covered, the assassination or murder of Brian Thompson. We're gonna get an update on Hannah Kobayashi, and then we're going to talk about the attacks that happened on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day morning, which were the Las Vegas car bombing, Cybertruck bombing, and also the truck attack in New Orleans. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with Luigi Mangione. Last I recorded a video was at the beginning of December and he had not yet been apprehended. So on December 19th, 2024, Luigi Mangione was identified by a customer and a worker at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. He was then apprehended by police where they found weapons, and they were able to arrest him on weapons possession charges. Then on December 19th, 2024, Luigi waived his extradition rights and was accompanied by law enforcement officials back to New York for his first hearing in Manhattan. So he's actually facing quite a few charges. He's facing charges both federally and at the state level. So New York State also has filed charges against him. So, quote, federal prosecutors also filed 4 new charges against Mangione: murder using a weapon with a silencer and 2 counts of stalking, in addition to the 11 state charges filed by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And actually, those 11 charges filed in New York include murder. So these charges make him eligible actually for the death penalty. And we also know that he is facing both state and federal charges. So it definitely sounds like he will be prosecuted at the federal level first versus the state level. Have you?
Yeah, that seems to be appropriate. So I think it really comes down to, did he have a bigger hit list, right? And did he have a greater reach of where he was going to go versus, just in the state of New York? So we know that he fled to Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania also filed charges just as a way to hold him until the New York district attorney was able to file charges as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see who actually goes to court first.
Yeah, I really do suspect he'll go federally, but I mean, who knows at this point. So here's what we know so far about Luigi Mangione. He is a 26-year-old Ivy League grad. I believe he went to Stanford University. He had a back injury that required him to have surgery on his back where he had pins placed in his spine. And actually, he had suffered from back pain prior to that incident. One friend in Hawaii described that when he would have a flare up in his back, he would be in severe pain, he would isolate. So it sounds like this was a long standing issue. He may have like some sort of spinal diagnosis and then had that surgery to alleviate the pain. I did see that he posted following that surgery that he had no more flare-ups, that he wasn't on painkillers, and that he had a fairly successful surgery. Friends did notice a change in him. It sounds like he was withdrawing and isolating. He was not a United Health customer, which I found very fascinating. It sounds like he specifically targeted United Healthcare because they are the largest healthcare insurer in the United States, not because he had had a bad experience with them.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. He detailed in his notebook that he actually considered using a bomb, which we know my dad and I were discussing. I did a little bit of research on statistics and bombs, and so what are they called? Bombs?
IEDs?
IEDs,
improvised explosive
devices. I kept calling them IUDs.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to push. Yeah, we don't want to blow up birth control.
Yeah. Yeah. So the IEDs and incendiary devices are the top two weapons used by terrorists in the United States or for terrorism purposes in the United States. So it's not surprising that he intended to use a bomb. What he ended up using was a 3D printed ghost gun. He ordered some of the parts, printed the other parts, and that was what he used and was found on him at the McDonald's. So they were able to take that gun, which is so stupid that he would keep it with him, but they were able to take that gun, match the casings found at the crime scene to the gun, so the markings.
Chamber markings, yeah.
Yeah, and then also the bullets that were not spent, they had fingerprints, and they were able to match his fingerprints to those bullets.
Yeah, and it sounded like ballistic testing matched as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as well as that water bottle that was left at the scene, they were able to match fingerprints on multiple items. When they found him, he was carrying multiple IDs. He had passports with him, and that's kind of how he got caught. The police went into the McDonald's and asked him to see his ID, and he gave them a false ID, and the police officer was like, "What are you doing? This is not you." And he was like, and then he got like noticeably, visibly shaken, so.
Well, I think actually super good police work, considering how many times you get suspicious people reported to the police, to go up as soon as he gave them a fake ID, that was reason to detain him, mm-hmm. right? They already believed, hey, we believe this is false. So right then and there, you now have the reason, the articulable suspicion to detain him. And the officers did a great job by just continuing to talk to him just to see, hey, have you been to New York? What have you been doing? It was really interesting.
Yeah, and he had, I think he admitted it in that moment, like, oh yeah, that's not me. So they also on him found like handwritten documents and one of those like handwritten notebooks. He had been writing in notebooks, and including a 3-page handwritten document that, quote, speaks to both his motivation and mindset, end quote. New York Police Department sources referred to the notes as a claim of responsibility where Mangione attempted to justify his actions. So he wrote things including like the U.S. had, quote, the most expensive healthcare system in the world, but lamented that the country ranked number 42 in life expectancy. He also referred to corporations as, quote, mafiosa, that have gotten too powerful, end quote, and said such companies abuse the United States for immense profit. He wrote that others had shown a light on corporations, corruption, and greed in the past, and claimed that he was, quote, the first to face it with such brutal honesty, end quote. So he had been reading the Unabomber, he had written these notes. He It does not seem that he had mentioned any other individual specifically, so it does seem like Brian Thompson was his only target.
I think it was his only successful target.
Mm.
In that note, he uses these, so he pluralizes that term, and in a couple of different places, these as in multiple targets. So I think the fact that he got picked up relatively quickly was a godsend, because I think he had other targets. I don't know if they're going to divulge any of that information, but he uses plural several times in that, and he had the opportunity to just get rid of that gun, right? If he wanted to just toss that into a body of water or whatever, he could have not still had that. I think he still had intended targets, and he had planned on being on the lam for a while based on the amount of money that he had. So really, I think it would be interesting to find out where he was going next and who his next target was.
Yeah, and I feel like law enforcement will keep that very close to the cuff going into a trial for him if there were other, because it says one official says that he, quote, didn't think that there's any specific threats to other people mentioned in that document, but they are concerned about the risks of other extremists following Mangione. But I do suspect, because he didn't leave, he went to Pennsylvania, he could have gone north and left through into Canada, right? Like, he could have fled in some
he could have gone in any
capacity.
direction, and all he did was hunker down in Pennsylvania for a little bit. So.
Yeah, he hunkered down and still had the weapons too. So my suspicion is, I agree that he had other targets, but
we may never know.
I think we'll find out in trial.
I'm hopeful.
I'm really hopeful that we'll find out in trial.
One of the things that I find most interesting about that case is he's from an affluent family. He wasn't a client or a benefactor of United Healthcare Systems. So really, what's his beef with United Healthcare specifically? And we know that he had an issue with the insurance industry, right? Healthcare insurance industry. But why specifically him? Of all of the millions of people who either don't have insurance or have substandard insurance, that guy was wealthy and had good health coverage.
Yeah, he comes from a wealthy family. I think he's connected to like a wealthy family in Maryland or something like that. Yep. He went to an Ivy League. Yeah, and then to hear that his surgery went successful, and like, yeah, it doesn't really fit the profile of somebody that is just continues to get beat down by unfortunate circumstances and is really struggling with capitalism. It doesn't seem like there was a law in his life that would make him so angry.
We also haven't heard a whole lot about his mental capacity.
Yeah.
Did he sustain any type of psychotic break? Was he a substance user? Other than like the previous 6 months to the homicide, he was a pretty normal guy. And then he just kind of went quiet.
Yeah, they said, like I said, that he was pretty active. I watched an interview with his roommate in Hawaii where he lived, and he lived in like a communal living situation. He was fairly active. It sounds like a surfer. It sounds like when he was in pain, though, he would shut himself off in his room. Nobody would hear from him, and then he would come out once the pain was over. But Lexi, my sister, and I were talking about, chronic pain, just being in chronic pain, and how it completely changes the way that your brain thinks and the way that you perceive the world and life. So if this is somebody that was living with chronic pain, I don't feel like it's a far stretch to that connection to the healthcare system of like especially if you're an empathetic person, you can imagine that if it's hard for him, who is from good
Has
circumstances
all
and
the
has all the
resources.
resources, I could see, empathizing with the millions that don't have that
Yeah,
access.
absolutely.
Yes, fascinating. Very interesting to see how he's being treated while he's had his first like hearing where he I don't think he's pled or anything, right?
No,
All I know is
way
he
too
waived
early.
his extradition and they were still filing charges on him. So yeah, it's interesting to see how he's been treated. He was sent to one of the worst jails in New York. He got a perp walk. He was surrounded by, federal officers. He was screaming at one point walking into the courtroom saying that this something about this is a shame to the American people or like you're whatever. He was like yelling.
Which seems to be very atypical behavior, not only for him, but I think in general. He had that sudden outburst, which he hadn't had yet, and he hasn't had since.
And I don't know. I don't thinking about the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, like thinking about people of that like committing those crimes. They're quiet. I don't remember them screaming in
Well, and Ted
court.
Kaczynski was an introvert who lived off grid, right? He had
Yeah.
no interest in being part of American society. But the interesting thing about Ted Kaczynski versus Luigi Mangione is this was a calculated, isolated incident for one man, right? Execution style versus Ted Kaczynski mailed pipe bombs and had no idea who was actually going to open them. I'm sorry, he mailed bombs. He didn't actually know who was going to be the recipient of those. So those are drastically different in the way that he would calculate. Yes, he had a beef with that particular right company or industry, but he didn't know who was going to open it. Versus Luigi Mangione executed Brian Thompson in cold blood from behind on
Very
a sidewalk.
pointedly,
Yeah.
yeah. And we'll get into the more Ted Kaczynski sort of profile here in a little bit when we start talking about what happened recently. But I don't know. I'm ready to move on to
Yeah,
Hannah.
let's
Are
go.
you? All right. So Hannah Kobayashi, last we left, she had been seen walking into Mexico from the United States. So this is Hannah Kobayashi. She went missing in November. She was on her way to New York. She did not catch her connecting flight from LA to New York. She then went kind of silent with her family and friends. She hung out in LA for about 4 days and then she went to Mexico. It was reported that she actually went to a town in Mexico that is notorious for like expats, so United States citizens that don't want to live in the United States anymore and want to live in Mexico. So it sounds like she was in that community. Her aunt was looking for her. Sounds like at some point they made contact. I believe it was the aunt, but I'm not sure. The aunt made contact with Hannah first. She then corresponded with her family, so her sister and her mom, at which point she told them that she was not interested in having a relationship or even coming back at that point. A few days later, her lawyer then went into Mexico and retrieved her and accompanied her back to the United States, where she was reunited with that aunt, Lori, who separated herself from the family. That feud seems to be still going on. Hannah, interestingly, did not make a comment about her father's death. All she said was, quote, "My focus now is on my healing, my peace, and my creativity." She also said, "I am deeply grateful to my family and everyone who has shown me kindness and compassion during this time," end quote. So, yeah, a whole lot of nothing, but at the same time, very interesting.
Yeah, I found it interesting that, with technology and the expectation of connectivity, we kind of demand our family and our friends to immediately respond. So I don't know if this was a good case by example, right? It's not a missing persons case. It really is a person who doesn't want everybody else to tell her how to feel while she's processing the death of her dad.
Well, he died after. He jumped from a parking garage at LAX. I think 2 days after her father had been there, he jumps from the third story of a parking structure and is found by police like
So
early in the morning.
Believes that she got kidnapped, or
her father and her were estranged for like years prior to this. I suspect maybe something happened. Maybe that was why she needed distance from her family. First of all, she said, I had no idea that the whole United States was looking for me. I had no idea that this was going on. And then nothing about her father, which at this point I do not believe she could say anything that would have the public like on her side. I think the public just views her as very selfish. But yeah, from our perspective, it's like, it sounds like she needed to get away. It sounds like she wanted space from her family and didn't want to be contacted. And it sounds like there is some history with her and her dad, and that's why we probably will not get a statement.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I haven't seen any updates on that case.
No. It is what it is. It's there again. It's a big nothing burger. It's just, I think the thing that concerns me is that we oftentimes see we see the police, law enforcement not really want to invest resources into missing persons. And really, for people that have family members and friends go missing, that's what you want. You want what happened with Hannah Kobayashi. You want the media to pick it up, and you want people to know about it, and you want her face plastered everywhere because that gives you the best opportunity of finding that person. But then when you have a scenario play out like this, where it was a voluntarily missing person, you expended resources to try to find, like, you're asking the public to contend with, like, this is how we want the police to respond, and we appreciate that response, the quick response, and spending resources on it. But on the other side, you have probably the public that's angry that these resources were used and more vetting wasn't done before the resources were used to determine that she was, because if they had traveled down to the border she got a bus ticket and they saw her on CCTV footage buying the bus ticket, then getting on the bus and going to that border town. If they had followed her, they would have known within days or within hours that she voluntarily crossed, because that's what they ended up doing. Is they ended up going down to the town that she had taken the bus to, and they pulled border security footage and they identified her walking across the border the day that she was filed a missing person.
Yeah, so she wasn't missing, and that's the interesting thing. There are lots of missing people out there, right?
And voluntarily missing.
But lots of voluntarily missing people. And just because you haven't seen them in a while doesn't mean that they're actually missing. So, my brother who lives in the homeless community and I haven't communicated with in 10 years is not a missing person, right? I haven't maintained a relationship with him. So is that a legitimate use of resources to go find him? Probably not.
And it's so difficult to, again, the public is contending with, like, you have policies which can hinder an investigation if you wait too long without seeking that missing person. And then on the other side, you don't want to waste resources by seeking out somebody so, like, from your perspective or from your experience, what are you looking for when somebody is looking to file a missing person?
Well, that's one of the most frustrating parts, is because oftentimes you will have this policy or procedure, like you mentioned, where they have to be missing for a full day, right? And why? If that was a child that was missing, it would be almost instantaneous, right? We would do an Amber Alert, or we would follow a different policy or procedure, versus, hey, this is a missing adult. We suspect foul play, right? What does it really take to get the wheels turning? So, yeah, that 24-hour really should be at the discretion of the investigator, and they should be able to run with that much more quickly, I think. But that also depends on the case.
Well, and to be fair, Hannah Kobayashi had sent text messages to family and friends stating that she believed that she had been scammed, that somebody was trying to steal her identity. So she had been sending alarming text messages that would warrant, in my opinion, an investigation. So I don't think that the police responded poorly by any means. I do wish that they had followed that. I mean, she had a very traceable path
Yeah.
the day that she left. Like,
Yeah, especially with the access to surveillance
all
in that
over.
area. Yeah, that would have been probably an easier investigation. Yeah, I think they probably could have shut that thing down way quicker than it ended up taking.
Yeah. That's what I took away from it. I truly wish Hannah Kobayashi and her family the best and all healing, because I'm sure that this has not been a fun situation for any of them. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? We're going to talk about Las Vegas and New Orleans.
Ready.
Okay, so we're going to start with Las Vegas first. So on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2024, a man by the name of Matthew Allen Livelsberger, Livelberger, but there's an S in there. Livelsberger. A white 37-year-old man. What?
Keep going. I think we should do that part over.
Okay. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2024, a man by the name of Matthew Allen Livelsberger, a white 37-year-old, started driving a Tesla Cybertruck that he rented in Colorado Springs, Colorado, to Las Vegas, Nevada. Something important to note is that Matthew Allen Livelsberger is actually Army Master Sergeant Livelsberger and a U.S. Special Forces Green Beret who had just been serving in Germany and was at the time of this incident on leave in Colorado. My voice broke. Did you hear? He drove New Year's Eve from Colorado Springs through New Mexico into Arizona, and we know this because he was stopping along the way to charge the Cybertruck. And actually, Tesla was able to quickly retrieve that footage from their charging stations and send it to law enforcement, like within hours of the incident. So he was charging along the way. He went through Arizona and then into Nevada. He arrived on the Las Vegas Strip at 7:30 a.m. It appears that he drove down the strip for about an hour, at one point pulling into the parking lot of Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. He then drove some more down the strip before returning to the Trump Hotel around 8:30. I would say the call to the police came in at 8:40. So around 8:30, he pulls in like just in front of the glass doors to the lobby of the Trump Hotel. And by the way, he probably did not stop. It's about an 11.5 hour drive from Colorado Springs to Las Vegas. So he pulled into the drive area where you can get like a valet, or you can just park to go into the lobby.
I think they call that
and drop
a
your stuff.
porte-cochere.
A what?
A porte-cochere. It's essentially the awning that goes over the main entrance.
Beautiful. Okay, so everything that happens next happens within like 15 seconds of him pulling up. So the truck pulls up, he shoots himself in the head while probably simultaneously pressing a detonator, which causes smoke to begin emerging from the vehicle before an explosion takes place and bright colors can be seen shooting from the Cybertruck. He injured about 7 people that were in proximity of the explosion. He is the only death. Very interesting because he chose a Cybertruck. The explosion was actually forced upwards and mitigated a lot of the damage the explosion would have otherwise caused. So the Cybertruck is like fortified by steel, and then it is touted as having like the bulletproof windows. So if you can imagine, the explosion happens rather than going out and damaging like the lobby windows and all of that stuff, it shot up and so damaged the, what'd you call it?
The porte-cochere.
So yeah, it's kind of his choice. Well, we'll talk about how it's kind of a statement. It mitigated a lot of the damage, and the damage could have been so much more severe had he been
Absolutely.
in a different vehicle.
I agree. If you look in the back of the Cybertruck based on news film, right, you can see all of the like Coleman fuel, gas cans, all of the things that look like they're pipe bombs or some sort of, shrapnel, or the intent is to send all of that shrapnel somewhere. But that's not what happened. The truck actually maintained its structural integrity very, very well. And like Savannah said, like that explosion went up instead of out. And by the grace of God, too, if you've seen that video, you have a person standing right just on the sidewalk next to the Cybertruck waiting for a cab or whatever. And then you can see somebody just inside the first glass door. Absolutely crazy to see that.
Well, I read an account by a couple. They were walking back to the hotel and stopped at a food cart right before. They're like, we're just going to grab something as the explosion went off. And he's like, that choice saved our lives because they just got knocked backwards. So, quote, damage from the blast was mostly limited to the interior of the truck because the explosion vented out and up and didn't hit the Trump Hotel doors just a few feet away, the sheriff said, end quote. So law enforcement discovered the driver's identity by tracing the rental from Turo, which is a peer-to-peer
app.
Yeah, it's an app, which I had never heard of that. Like, basically, if you have a vehicle, you can loan it out, rent it out.
Yeah, I can rent it out to you, and you and I can exchange, and it pays you. Very similar, like motorcycles have a couple of apps that do that as well.
I was thinking Airbnb.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they identified him as being the person that rented the vehicle, the Cybertruck. They also were able to identify some tattoos on the remains that they contacted his wife and showed his wife the tattoos, and she did confirm that those were hers. And then and then it sounds like they also did some dental records and DNA testing to match the DNA.
Also found his passport.
Yeah,
like
his military ID, passport,
yeah.
all of that was in the vehicle. So we definitely know that this was Matthew Leibelsberger.
Sounded like they traced the guns relatively quickly as well. He purchased those.
He purchased them legally, yeah. So, quote, a law enforcement official said investigators learned through interviews that he may have gotten into a fight with his wife about relationship issues shortly before he rented the Tesla and bought the guns. So in the Cybertruck, they found a handgun at the feet of the driver. So in combination with the gunshot to the head, law enforcement can determine that that's a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. I would imagine if there's no smoke in his lungs, they can determine that that was his cause of death. But it sounds like his remains were he was charred beyond recognition. Yeah. They also found another firearm, which they believe he purchased before this incident, a number of fireworks and firework mortars, which would explain the colors that bystanders saw coming from the vehicle. They found camp fuel canisters. They aren't completely sure of how it detonated, but they're pretty confident that he was the one that detonated the explosion. They also found, as we were saying, a military ID, passport, and I would assume his wallet because they found his credit cards and then a phone. This is being investigated as an act of terrorism due to the musky Trump of it all.
So it's tough to think about a special forces operator doing a terrorist act. So I would tell you, I'm going to speculate for a minute and just suggest that this guy would have had a lot of knowledge on how to build IEDs and bombs and things like that. I would suggest that this was a suicide, and he's making some sort of a statement. But But I don't believe that this is terrorism. I believe that this is suicide, and he was just making a point. I think the destruction could have been much more significant and drastically different than the next case we're going to talk about. This was one death, and that was his own.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine, well, I mean, with somebody that's a Green Beret, it's hard to imagine that he didn't account for the Cybertruck. You know, that's a surprise to me that he wouldn't account for that, but at the same time, where his where his truck was parked, I also don't think that much damage could have been done. It'd be one thing if you took an explosive like in an underground parking garage, like beneath the hotel, as we know some hotels have, you know, the parking underneath. If you had an explosive under there, then you're talking about the entire building
Right.
coming crashing down and doing a bunch of damage versus going under the carport, whatever you called it. Say it again.
It's a porto cache. Interesting enough, I think the Trump media team actually put that out as it was under the porto cache.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So I just feel like I don't feel like he was trying. It's also super early in the morning, on, you know, the day of the new year, so people are probably not going to be out and about. So it doesn't seem like he was aiming for carnage or a lot of
He could have driven
damage.
that truck right through that glass door
and
actually had very significant damage to both the structure and the people. It doesn't appear that was his intent, so we don't really know. But that's just we know that something happened in Colorado with his spouse. There was an allegation of infidelity, according to a neighbor. Had a young child.
Yeah, an infant.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So, you know, drove a long way. That's a long way and he had a lot of time to think about a plan. So it's tough to imagine that his plan was to actually hurt others. I think there's also a piece where he is a Green Beret and his job is to help people and protect people, right? Granted, he does that by violence, but he's a guardian. I think in his soul, he's probably there to protect others, and so that's why I would say that this was a suicide with potentially a statement in some fashion.
Yeah, and definitely a statement. It's not lost on any law enforcement. I don't think that this happened in front of the Trump Tower, that it was in a Tesla Cybertruck. Elon Musk has donated upwards of $250 million to Trump's presidential election and will be joining Trump in the presidential cabinet administration, kind of a new era of private entities and private individuals entering government again. So it's not far to see where that message was. Like, it's not hard to see what that message was.
No, but I think they're working on substantiating any of those.
Yes,
he didn't leave a note.
He didn't.
I don't think so. It would have been burned up.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they have his phone, so potentially he could have left.
And it's interesting. Digital. I also think there's another component there, which is he's an active military member. So Department of Defense would usurp the authority that anybody else has.
Which it sounds like they said that they are like fully cooperating, but they're allowing Las Vegas to handle the investigation. Yeah. Doesn't sound like they're going to take it over. So
interesting.
Cybertruck update.
Okay, so NBC News just put out 2 new articles in relation to the Cybertruck bombing. Soldier who died in Cybertruck left writing criticizing government. Authorities say law enforcement officials say Matthew Leibelsberger left behind a diary of activity on his phone. Those who knew and served with Leibelsberger described a patriotic soldier. A decorated Army veteran suffering from PTSD called U.S. government leadership weak and appeared to acknowledge he purposely blew up a Tesla Cybertruck at the entrance of a Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas on New Year's Day, police said Friday. Assistant Sheriff Dory Corrin of the Las Vegas Metro PD said investigators were able to access one of 2 phones found in the Cybertruck and viewed writing in an app that seemed to serve as a journal. documenting some of Matthew Allen Leivelberger's movements and state of mind from December 21st to New Year's Eve. 2 letters in the phone app suggest possible motive in the blast. In one letter, he tells fellow service members, veterans, and all Americans it's time to wake up because the country's leadership is weak and only serves to enrich themselves. A second letter appeared to shed more light on Leivelberger's thinking. We are the United States of America, the best country to ever exist, but right now we are terminally ill and heading towards collapse. A second letter said, this was not a terrorist attack. It's a wake-up call. Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. What better way to get my point across than a stunt with fireworks and explosives? I need to cleanse my mind of the brothers I've lost and relieve myself of the burden of lives I took. Spencer Evans, special agent in charge of the FBI's Las Vegas division, added that the investigation, along with a consultation with the Army, determined that Leibelsberger likely had PTSD, and investigators are aware that there are personal potential family issues or personal grievances in his own life that may have been contributing factors. The Clark County coroner determined that he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, police said. Authorities said they were able to identify Leibel's badly burned body through various means, including family DNA and tattoos. Leibelsberger, 37, was on approved leave from the military when he rented a Tesla Cybertruck and drove from Colorado to Las Vegas. According to law enforcement officials, fireworks and gas in the bed of the truck would later ignite after he parked it just outside of the Trump hotel entrance. People who served with Leibelsberger throughout his nearly 2 decades in uniform described him as a dedicated, patriotic soldier and a good teammate. 2 soldiers who served with him in recent years both expressed surprise at his actions, one saying that he was not a violent person.
Our next story, there is no indication that these 2 stories are connected at all. The media is really, really trying to tie the Las Vegas incident to the New Orleans incident. Investigators said, FBI specifically has said that they are looking into it, but they do not feel like it is connected. The biggest connections that we see right now are that they're both, prior or active duty military. It sounds like there may have been some overlap on the bases that they stayed. Some weird coincidences, like they both use the Turo app, but other than that, there's not a lot to indicate that these were connected.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So, Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar, a 42-year-old man, a person of color. That's important to note because, well, first of all, he was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas. He is a person of color. He was a Muslim man, but he was from this country, born and raised from this country. There's some misinformation going around out there that he was an immigrant or refugee of that nature. That's not true. So, Shamsuddin Jabbar rented a Ford F-150 Lightning truck from the same car rental app that we just talked about, Turo, on December 30th in Houston, Texas, where he was living at the time. The following morning, December 31st, he loaded up that truck with guns and explosives. A neighbor said that he approached Shamsuddin.
Let's just call him Jabbar. I just saw the picture of his military uniform and it had Jabbar on there, so I just figured that's his last name.
That's his last name. It sounds like he went by Sham, but I don't want to call him a nickname, so we'll go with Jabbar.
Okay.
Shamsuddin's Jabbar. Okay. A neighbor said that he approached Jabbar, and Jabbar told him that he was moving to New Orleans for work, and that he didn't need help packing. He then drove from Houston to New Orleans. Once he arrived in New Orleans, he can be seen on CCTV footage taking coolers, which we now know contained IEDs or improvised explosive devices, and was placing them around the French Quarter the evening of December 31st. Then between 1:29 a.m. and 3:02 a.m., Jabbar posted a series of now deleted Facebook videos, 5 in total, discussing that he, quote, sorry, hold on, I need to wet my gullet. I'm gonna say 5 in total, stating that he had, quote, discussed planning to kill his family and having dreams that helped him inspire him to join ISIS, according to multiple officials briefed on the investigation, end quote. Then at 3:15 a.m., Jabbar can be seen in the white Ford F-150 driving down Canal Street so he's driving down Canal Street. Here's Bourbon Street. There's a police cruiser here and then a corner. He goes past the police cruiser and turns into a bunch of people standing there, plows them over, continues down Bourbon Street for about 2 blocks. It's been reported that he was swerving, driving super fast, literally trying to hit as many people as possible. He then crashes his truck about 2 blocks down, crashes his truck. He is like getting out and starts open firing on people. A whole crowd of police come. They get into a shootout where Jabbar is then fatally shot. In Jabbar's truck, quote, investigators found guns and what appeared to be an improvised explosive device in the vehicle, which bore the flag of the Islamic State group, along with other explosive devices elsewhere in the French Quarter, end quote. So they found IEDs that were crude pipe bombs stuffed with coils and nails, as well as a grenade. They found 2 live IEDs, so they found a couple of those pipe bombs in the truck, and then in the coolers close by where the crash happened, so like a little bit back, they found those IEDs in the coolers that he had placed. 2 were live IEDs, so had the potential to be detonated. I think they found a couple more that were dead, so they were defective IEDs, and all were removed. So they have searched his residence where they found chemicals related to bomb making, and they have issued and I believe executed some search warrants in other states on other properties they believe associated to the incident. Yesterday, they said that they thought that there were accomplices connected to this attack. Today, they were reporting that they do not believe. Yeah,
that's what they said.
Interestingly, ISIS or any other group has not come out with a statement laying claim on the attack either. Which is something that we would typically see when there is an act of terrorism that's claimed by a group like ISIS. We would see ISIS come out with a video or some sort of statement claiming that attack.
Yeah, this one, I think this one's interesting. I know you're going to probably get into it here in a minute, but this guy had a relatively sudden change of behavior. I know there's a lot of things going on in his personal life, but if you've looked at his just photographs of his face versus what he looked like even a few months ago, this guy looks tired. He looks haggard, and I don't know if it's substance use. Probably doubtful that it's mental illness. That probably would have been picked up by the military, prior to that, unless it's substance induced, right? So, but this guy was a real estate agent in Houston. And yet they served a search warrant in like a single wide. So evidently he had some financial stuff going on, some family stuff, maybe some estranged relationships. So it sounds like he had a lot going on in his personal life, and there was a lot of lack of success recently. So I want to hear more about what's going on with him or what's going on prior to the bombing.
Yeah, so Jabbar had become more devout in his religion in recent years. One friend cited seeing a noticeable change in 2015. He was raised Muslim along with his family, but around that time, 2015, they could see that he had become more devout to the Muslim religion, and in recent months he had grown out full facial hair and become more modest. After leaving the military, by the way, he served 10 years in both Army and Army Reserves, and then after leaving he went into the private sector. Sounds like he was doing some sort of consulting job. He was making pretty good money, though he did talk in some papers that he wrote during his getting his bachelor's degree about his struggle exiting the military and re-entering society as a civilian, and just about kind of the hurdles that made it difficult to make that transition, like the language that you speak in the military, it doesn't really translate. So he discussed that kind of being tricky, and then he also had a couple of things happen. So he had a few run-ins with the law driving under the influence. So I would suspect that alcoholism plays a role here in some capacity, though I don't know what that looked like as he sank deeper into the Muslim religion and extremism, because that is very not okay to drink
Yeah,
alcohol.
forbidden by faith.
Yeah, so that'd be an interesting thing to look at. So he had some run-ins. One of those incidents happened while he was on base in North Carolina. He had gone through 2 divorces. His second divorce, the most recent one, I believe happened in 2020, and was his ex-wife was rewarded a temporary restraining order. And during some of his court filings, he did say, he was experiencing severe financial hardships. So even though he was making about $10,000 a month, which was just like crazy, I cannot fathom that. He's making $10,000 a month, but he was in severe debt because he had 2 failed businesses. He was having to pay child support. He was in severe credit card debt. So it sounds like he just financially was really struggling.
Yeah. Of interest, though, this guy's way different than the Green Beret we talked about earlier. This guy was a human resources information technology guy. So he sat at a desk, and other than, I think the media has overlapped a couple of places where they were stationed, but nothing related to what he did versus what a special forces operator does. So
yeah, it sounds like he was known as just a quiet person, like a pretty reserved person, very kind, very nice. That's what we've seen in a lot of people that have known him coming out and speaking out about the fact that he did this. I think for me, this was really tough to read because 14, he killed 14 people. They're all so young, like 18-year-old, 19-year-olds. I think the oldest that I've seen so far is 27. The footage, I really do not encourage anybody to go watch that footage of him plowing through people and people just running for their lives. I mean, it's terrifying. It's really awful to think that he initially had this plan. I mean, he has a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old daughter, I believe. He had initially planned on having them come under the guise of a celebration and murdering them, and but he was worried that the statement wouldn't get across. He basically said that he thought his message would be lost and that he wanted it to be about like the deniers versus the believers versus the non-believers. So strictly tied to Muslim religion.
Yeah, I think when you are trying to get that message across, I think it's going to fall. That message is going to fall flat every time because the United States is a relatively young country, but the resilience of Americans is world renowned. Everybody knows of the resilience, and I think American success, doesn't matter how you quantify that, right? Whether it's financial or educational or access to whatever. I think that American independence and American success and that resilience is going to come through much louder than any message that they're attempting to send for political ideology.
Well, it's also just with the melting pot that the United States is, it's impossible to rally a significant number of people around any given subject. So this just is not the target population for that sort of course there's extremism taking place, but there just comes a line where certain extremism will go far, as we saw with like QAnon, and other extremism will not go far because you will not have anybody to back you.
Yeah, when you kill people, your message fails to reach anything other than you're a horrible human being who kills others. So it's much more of a predatory behavior versus, hey, I'm trying to convince you of our views.
That, or like the only time that you see, I mean, you see martyrism be successful in places like Palestine before this happened. Like that is when I first learned about martyrs, in which case your stance is backed by your entire people.
Yeah, the entire culture.
Yeah. That's when you're successful with violence and death, that in that way where you have that support and there's no other outlet from your perception.
Well, that's an interesting term, martyr. So you'll hear oftentimes in cultures where they say he was martyred, not he was killed, right? Or he died. He was martyred, which means that he will be in our memory forever, right? He died for the greater cause of our culture.
But technically by suicide.
Yeah.
He died by suicide, or she, their women do this as well, where they strap explosives to them, or you know, in order to make the most damage and to make a point, and
right.
That is martyrism. And it's such a fine line between being a martyr and being a terrorist.
So which one do you think Jabbar is?
I think in his mind he is a martyr for his cause, but for the rest of us this is terrorism. This is, he specifically said he wanted to do damage for a cause.
Yeah.
There's no real way around that. So let's talk about the failings of the New Orleans Police Department, or perception of failing by the New Orleans. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, let's talk about, the media is really picking up and focusing on the failings of the New Orleans Police Department, and that is because something very, very sad, unfortunate happened, which is that the blockades,
the
bollards, thank you.
Yeah.
They had installed around New Orleans, which are those automatic pillars that kind of come up and they block traffic. They had been deemed to be defective and were not working. And so in November, they had taken these bollards and were fixing them, and they were set to be ready in February for the Super Bowl, because New Orleans is hosting the Super Bowl. So all they had is a police cruiser, and the real unfortunate thing is how far this guy was able to get. 2 blocks doesn't sound like that far, but it's so far.
Yeah, when it's packed with people all over, and it's a pedestrian street, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's in the street. They're not necessarily just on the sidewalks.
Yeah, and we live in a fairly small city, and just thinking about like one of our main streets that has, you know, that can be closed off for events downtown. It has on each block, it has
bollards.
Yeah, it has
to prevent that,
exactly. And just thinking about the small events that we have in our city, like thinking about the park that we utilize that's near the Capitol. I mean, there will be 2 entrances for humans, and the entire perimeter of that event is blocked by vehicles, whether it be food trucks, whether it be emergency first responder vehicles. Like, it's completely blocked. And the same with the roads. When we have events where we'll do like bicycling around a block, but every single street that is accessing that event street is blocked by 2 police cruisers typically, or more.
Yeah, a lot of physical barriers for sure that are used for those type of events. It's interesting in New Orleans where he was able to make it as far as he did, and you can tell based on the police response how many officers were on shift that night.
Yeah.
So the fact that he was able to get as far as he was, getting into an exchange of gunfire with them, you know, thank God they were able to shoot him before he did any more damage. But, they do have a video of him firing a weapon while he's driving the truck.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So if you can imagine the potential carnage that could have been done, he killed 14 people. Imagine had he been able to get farther or didn't crash into that, or if he had access to a bigger crowd, what the potential damage could have been.
That and who knows, it's such an interesting idea that he did this at 3:15, not at midnight when it's going to be the most people. I mean, very, very interesting decisions. He also chose to start open firing rather than detonate those IEDs. I mean, luckily he was fatally shot before he was able to detonate them, but it makes me wonder, like, did something go wrong? Was he not able to detonate those devices? Or did he just panic and that's why he got out and started open firing before he was able to finish what he had intended on doing? So I don't know. But I think my biggest question is, where does the investigation go from here, especially if there's no other associates that can be traced down?
Yeah, I think you'll see very similar to the case in Germany, right, where you have, this was his access to a weapon. Now it's a very significant weapon, right? You're talking about a 5,000-pound truck, which has the damage to kill a lot of people, and it's been used in Europe very significantly because they don't have the access to weapons. Now in the United States, both access to weapons, you saw both the explosion in New Orleans, or potential with the IEDs, and the explosion in Las Vegas, how all of that happened, right? So you can imagine the potential damage that somebody could cause with guns and explosives. But then now you have a bomb that's going at 60 miles an hour at that speed and that weight. So yeah, really unfortunate. But the damage, I think the vehicle piece of that is a huge piece, and I think that we will probably continue to see that worldwide because of access to cars.
Yeah, FBI is definitely warning of copycats. They're worried that this is gonna.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. They always warn of things like that. They warned about copycat murders based on Luigi Mangione's case.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always the case. But is it a political statement? I think that's the interesting thing to consider. Is this person making a political statement? Are they martyring themselves? And what is that message?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what sorts of measures New Orleans and other large cities start to take in order to, because something that I don't even remember the exact quote, but retired law enforcement official with the New York City Police Department said, like, you should know enough by now to have prevented this sort of attack. So, for example, in New York, after I think in Germany, where it was a vehicle that they drove, New York then put cement blocks on sidewalks of those main streets so that they could block vehicles from driving up onto the sidewalk like we saw in this case.
Yeah, but you also have, law enforcement will always be responsive, right? It's tough to be proactive because when you're talking about being creative in order to hurt people, that's an offensive move, and it's tough to keep up with all of that. So I think it was a fluke. I can only imagine how many events New Orleans has, right? They host the bowl games and the Super Bowl and Mardi Gras and all the things that happen throughout the year. They have a huge playbook, and I guarantee it's flawless 99% of the time. There just happened to be a gap this time with the removal of those bollards, and so a vehicle had access to all of those folks participating in New Year's Eve.
And the point of that, I think this is important to know, is that it would have done those bowlers would have done the same thing that that police cruiser was doing at the entrance of the street. It would not have blocked him from going onto the sidewalk. However, bollards placed throughout the corridor, throughout the French Quarter, so every block or every other block of those busy streets where pedestrians are and where you do block them off, having those bollards there would have prevented him from getting as far as he did with his truck. He could not, he would not have been able to go around them when the sidewalk was not that wide. I mean, he was able to get onto that sidewalk because it was a corner of that street. And honestly, watching that video, he looks like he's about to drive right by. He flips around and drives through. There's so many people in that corner. And yeah, and so then you just see, then I don't know how long it is, but you just see like a huge group of police officers then running down past him. So you're in a vehicle, you make it past them, and you're already 2 blocks ahead
just
of
like
the police in seconds. Yeah, absolutely insane. Very weird too, I guess, this idea of like mass murder happening and then just moving on with your life the next day is very, and I'm sure people don't feel like that in New Orleans, but just they had it clean, they had the bodies of the victims removed by the next morning. They had the street pretty much clean by the next morning. I mean, they postponed the Sugar Bowl by 1 day, but then it was back to normal. And I don't know, it's hard to not feel like we haven't been desensitized by mass violence.
Probably not back to normal, but open for business for sure, right? And imagine how many, I'm sure that if you researched how many mass casualty incidents we've had this year, that desensitization that we as Americans have gone through for the last, prior to even 9/11, right? So more than 20 years already. Yeah. But it is gone. We as Americans are so callous. And I don't think that we're isolated by any stretch. Those things happen in countries around the world, right? Probably to a bigger degree. We do have a ton of violence in the United States. A lot of that is gun violence, right?
Yeah, and I guess for me, I think it's sad because I think in a like more rural or smaller community, things would be shut down and the whole community would be mourning this loss and things wouldn't feel so normal. I guess part of that is it is a big city, and I'm sure a piece, an element of this was that these were visitors largely and not people that are like that was their home. It was more like these were tourists that were involved in a really sad
and
accident.
I think that's the crux of the tragedy, right? We don't have, this happened in New Orleans, but those folks came from all over the United States. And so it really impacts all of those other communities just a little bit differently.
Yeah. So. Yes. Very sad. I don't know.
Yeah, our hearts go out to the folks who were impacted by the tragedy in New Orleans and Colorado and Las Vegas.
Yeah. So. Yes, very sad. We wish everybody healing, only healing, and thanks for thanks for joining us. This is my dad, and I'm Savannah, and we're saying goodbye. If you want to join us for more interesting subjects that the media is covering, I don't have a good outro for this, but you can subscribe or follow, and don't forget to like this video, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Ding, ding.